Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. I had an interesting experience earlier this year where it occurred to me that the Lou Bega song Mambo Number 5 had to be part of an album. And so I went to the library and got out Lou Bega's album. And, I enjoyed it. It's obvious, yet it's interesting to remember that these artists who are really only known for one song are musicians, that they aren't thinking in terms just of that one song and then disappearing off the face of the earth. They make full albums. This next example happened more accidentally. However, I was at a branch of the Toronto Public Library recently and I came across this album, Making Mirrors by Gotye. Now, Gotye is an artist who I would not have paid attention to when he had his moment in the sun, because I guess he was on the charts, and that's just not how I look for the music that interests me, even though I understand that music made in all eras can be well made. But I had that similar reaction that I did to Lou Bega. Wait a minute, this guy isn't just one song, he has an album. And it turns out Gotye has a couple other albums before this one. And I find it cool if you look at all his album covers, that they're all these abstract paintings. This is his last record, and it's now from 10 years ago, which kind of caught me off guard. I feel like I remember first hearing somebody that I used to know in 2014 or 15, so I don't know if he had a resurgence on the Canadian charts or my sense of time is weirdly distorted with this one. But it was a surprisingly interesting record. So it opens with a track called Making Mirrors. It's more of an introduction. It has a vocal that's kind of suppressed behind a spacey, misty sound. And so it goes on for about a minute, and then we get to track 2, which is called The Easy Way Out. And it has a sort of hard rock intro sound followed by a very soft vocal. Gotye shows that he can do different things with his voice. His voice rises in the verse into a kind of falsetto range. And this comes on a bit suddenly in a way that's kind of memorable. So the impression you get already with these first 2 tracks is that the experience of listening to a Gotye record is that he's playing with textures, he's playing with certain sounds, and unlike other experimental musicians, he does clearly like lyrics. These songs do have lyrics for much of their runs. You could absolutely do a cover of them at an open mic, but he's very much a sort of work in the studio, make as many interesting sounds as you can kind of artist. Now, track 3 is his hit, and I appreciate that this is not, the first track on the album, and I appreciate that this is not the first track on the album. I feel like some albums are constructed where they just throw the famous one at the beginning and then they just throw everything else at the end because they figure you'll have lost attention by then. So I think saving this one for track number 3 shows that Gotye really has care for his full body of work. And when you hear this one compared to other hit songs, it sounds very weird, but it actually contrasts a lot with Gotye's, the rest of the songs on this album as well. What makes Somebody That I Used to Know such an unusual hit is its sparse sound. You can hear that little riff played on glockenspiel, da 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 da, rather than just sort of big chords, big underlying strings. It has a very stripped down sound. And the rest of the songs on this record are more about rich textures getting caught up in smoke and mist. The other interesting part with this song is it's a duet with a New Zealand singer named Kimbra. And the melody of the verse that Kimbra sings is different than the verse that Gotye sings. So even though this was a big hit, this was a song that everyone knew for a while, it is quite an interesting composition. And on the one hand, you can certainly hear how it is the hit compared to every other Gotye track on this one, because this is the one where his lyrics are most emphatic, where you can remember them right away. But it also sounds very weird compared to other hits. So I'm glad that I don't have to be all hipster and be like, I can't like this one because it was in the charts. This is Somebody That I Used to Know is a really cool song. Track number 4 is called Eyes Wide Open, and after the sparseness of Somebody I Used to Know, this one goes right back to a nice big spacey sound. It also uses big drums as well as sort of a loopier drum sound. But what does remain consistent, whether Gotye is going for a sparser sound or a thicker sound, is that there's a mournful quality in his voice. His songs almost always sound melancholy, sort of regardless of what the lyrics are saying. Track number 5, this might be the next closest thing to being a hit to Somebody That I Used to Know, but really that one is just very different from everything else on the record. It opens with a nice little synth hook. It has a resonant chorus and then little bursts of horn sounds in the bridge that then abruptly go away. Like, what you can tell with this song and with some of the other Gotye compositions in general is that he doesn't just do the thing where he starts quiet and he builds a thicker and thicker wall of sound. No, he'll use an interesting sound and then take it away. It's like you're on a journey, and much of the journey is boringly walking on the road, but occasionally you feel a moment of drama, like there's a storm coming, or whatever the little bell keyboard sound indicates. I suppose you could describe this song, if you look at the lyrics, as a more interesting version of the Beatles song "Sexy Sadie," since it's basically a disparaging song about a trickster figure. Yet the criticism comes with undeniable admiration, because, you know, how are you able to trick these people? How are you able to sell yourself to others, in a way that continues to impress them? That's the kind of vibe I get from this song. Track number 6 is I Feel Better. So on the one hand, Gotye does have this mournful sound throughout all his songs, but he can also, at the same time, he does find ways to bring in different genres to make his song sound different. This one sounds like a big, upbeat 80s pop song. You know, the vibe you might get on like Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, or Huey Lewis's The Power of Love, but if you imagine mixing that with a sounder voice. So it's a big soul sound, with big horns, though there's this one instrument in there that sounds kind of like horns, but not quite. I don't know how to describe it. I obviously don't have a sophisticated relationship to synthesizers, and we will get to that in a couple tracks. Track number 7 is I'm Your Light. So this one starts with a funky guitar riff. It managed to sound kind of like a continuation of I Feel Better, but with different instrumentation. There's kind of a glittery synth underlying it. And then there's a nice little chant towards the end of In Your Light that kind of reminds me of the spiritual feel of Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes. Now, track number 8 is called State of the Art. So Gotye's distorting his voice. It's what's called, I guess, on simple programs, the monster effect. So he makes his voice artificially low to give it this sort of sci-fi robotic theme. But he's not talking about some fancy computer per se. He is talking about when his family bought a Cotillon organ. And if you know that, you're like, oh, it's quite a literal song about how cool it is having one of these sort of keyboard organ hybrid things. But otherwise, it just sounds like a song about weird technology. When the Cotillon arrived, we threw out the television. I'm model D75. Track number 9 is called Don't Worry, We'll Be Watching You. So this one goes back to a sparser sound, though not the acoustic sparseness of somebody that I used to know. It's sort of very much relying on keyboard sounds. A synthy bass is the most constant presence throughout. And this is one, again, that makes me think about the fact that Gotye doesn't just build on his sound. He's happy to have sparseness or loopiness for lots of the record, and occasionally bring in a new instrument when he wants to accent something. Track number 10 is called Give Me a Chance. This one it continues that melancholy feel we have on so many of the tracks, but it also amounts to a slightly more hopeful continuation of Don't Worry, We'll Be Watching You. So it starts out with a nice run of lyrics, and then it suddenly runs out of lyrics to say. It's only 2 quick verses and then a couple of choruses. And I assume it's because this song is about humbleness. So Gotye says his piece, and then he sort of stops to listen. I know I let you down. I know I let you down, but you're giving me a chance. Then track number 11 is called Save Me. This one starts with choral singing, singers other than Gotye. It has a similar vibe, again, to the last few tracks, and a lot of the tracks on the record with that brooding sound, but also has some impressive moments of falsetto, which we haven't really heard since earlier on the record. And the impression I get from this backup singing is that even as Gotye is singing from a place of loneliness, by having this choir sing behind him, or these backup singers sing behind him, he's indicating that one can feel lonely and pathetic and like one's failed, and also come to realize that these are very common experiences and that these are not really things to be ashamed of. And I could not love, because I could not love myself. Never good enough. No, that was all I tell myself. And I was not well. But I could not help myself. I was not giving up on living. Track number 12 is the concluding track on the album. It was a bit of a disappointment for me, and not because it's a bad track, it's just because it's a track that I didn't really want to listen to. It's called Bronte. It's not about Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, and Bromwell. It's about a dog that had that name, and the end of that dog's life. It was a real dog that some of his friends had. And it just kind of bums me out that it feels like so much dog media, Old Yeller, like it, Old Shep. It's about tragedy. It's about death. Like, having a relationship with a dog shouldn't be about constantly thinking about its mortality. It should be about, thinking about its friendship. And maybe I'm a hypocrite because I wrote a song 11 years ago called The Lonesome Death of a Dog. But in fairness, that was a protest song about the mistreatment of a dog at the hand of people. I generally just want to celebrate dogs as lively creatures. And it's a shame there can't just be more happy dog media out there. That's not just for kids. But anyway, it was cool to think of Gotye not just as that eccentric guy on the radio, but as a really interesting album artist. I learned that his name, there's a weird story. So it's a spelling of the French name Gotye, which is the French equivalent of his Dutch first name, Walter. I don't know how to say that. And then because he was born in Belgium, which has both Dutch and French as official languages, but I think he's lived in Australia since he was 2, in practice, his name is Wally or Walter. His songs are credited to Wally de Backer. So you have to know that Wally de Backer is the same person as Gotye, because Wally equals Walter equals Walter equals Gotye equals Gotye. So cool chain, cool to learn that about this artist. And yeah, I hope one day he makes more records again because, well, somebody I used to know may be the one true standout on here. Overall, it's a very strong record that shows a lot of talent and a lot of interesting moments. And as I continue to listen to this record, some of the other songs might come to resonate with me as well, because there's so much feeling and inspiration in all of them. So, I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.